Greetings, YouTube. Someone requested I discuss how I did character creation in my Overkill 3rd edition Game World campaign. This is the one I ran back starting in the 80s and went into the 90s. And when the campaign started, I hadn't planned on it really being a campaign. It was just going to be a game. I was going to run it until I got bored, and it ended up lasting over 3 years. So apparently I didn't get bored. And eventually I even needed to come up with a plot line. It was terrifying. But to save myself a lot of trouble, I had pretty much liberated the storyline, or at least the nations around the TMNT After the Bomb game. This is the 1st edition. I really wish I'd had access to the 2nd edition of the After the Bomb. I think I've talked about After the Bomb 2nd edition before, but it is the single best mutant animal creation system I have ever read. It is just awesome. It is so much fun just to tinker with this. And both the 1st edition and the 2nd edition were a very similar mechanic. You'd have a species, and it would list different racial characteristics, abilities they could have, like a bite or a tail flap or flying or swimming, depending what the species was. And it would have a number of point value for each one. For example, you could have a small bite, or a medium-sized bite, or a big bite if you were a crocodile, showing how much of your animal atavistic characteristics your character had. And you paid for these with something known as biological energy, or Bio-E, and the smaller your species, the more Bio-E you had, the larger your species, the less you had, and you could use these points to just increase your size or decrease your size, to gain or lose points, and then you could then buy your racial abilities. But you could actually play a mutant animal that had no racial abilities. You could play, for example, a crocodile that had no swimming or armor or bite or a tail slap, but was just really big because you left all of your Bio-E points in size. So that was just an idea what you could do. The reason I mention this is that when the system started, when I started playing the game, 3rd edition Game World, I used the game as it was. I think I used 4 die 6, throw at the lowest, put them where you wanted to, pick your species, mutant, human, animal, or pure strain human, and I think I had worked up some rough ideas what plants could do. No one ever wanted to be a plant, so I don't think I had to do a whole lot with it. The only plants I had were non-player characters, so I really didn't have to come up with creation rules for them. 4th edition Game World was the one that had the best plant rules, and I think one of the best rules for making characters within the genre of just the Game World versions, the different editions. Please realize I have not played the 4th edition version of Game World, so I've got the new one that just came out, so I have no idea what that one's like. So when I started the 3rd edition game, it was just playing with what you got them, And as time went by, I really began to realize that I needed more detailed mutant animal rules because the setting I had chosen, or at least borrowed heavily from, was going to mean that almost everyone was going to play mutant animals. So I went back to where I had stolen the ideas from for the plot line, at least the locations, and borrowed the TMNT After the Bomb creation system with the Bio-E points I just explained. So what I would do is we would design a character's species, and then we would roll mutations on top of that. I believe you got fewer mutations if you were playing a mutant animal than if you had decided to play a mutant human. But I don't think anyone after the original group of players ever chose to play a mutant human. Everybody played the mutant animals because they liked playing mutant animals. As time went by, I got more and more into tailoring the mutations that the character would have rather than rolling them randomly. I really began to build mutational suites so that they would be complementary. And in a lot of ways, I was really going towards the idea that these were mutant animals that were multiple generations. So instead of each generation of mutant animal being the first, so every single character, your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather all had to roll randomly. You are the descendant of a successive group of mutants who have reinforced their mutations through breeding, and for the simple fact that they survived. Those with bad mutations didn't survive, And so those with good mutations got to breed with other people with good mutations, an expression of evolution, just in a kind of a comic booky way. And by the end of the campaign, near the end, I was designing the characters pretty much flat out. I would have a player tell me, I want to play a tiger, and I want it to be combat-oriented. Okay, bingo, this is what we'll do. I had a guy who played a sloth, actually it's a giant sloth, a megalotherion, I believe is what they're called, but I'm not positive. That was a lumberjack. So we worked the character up through that. And the best example I can think of all these different characters was my friend Greg. Now, Greg and I have known each other since we were 8 or 10. I believe he is the oldest person I know in my life that's not family that I'm still in contact with. He's been my friend forever, and he is one of the better role players I've ever met. And he wanted to play in my game, and I knew it was an opportunity to really design a really great character that I think was cool and would add something to the game. And I knew Greg would not care what I handed him. If I'd handed him a character that was Papa Smurf, he would have played it. But what I handed him was a super soldier built off of the Warhammer 40,000 Space Marines, going by the name of Niven 7. Yes, named after Larry Niven, the author. And I read an article in White Dwarf that listed all the different abilities that a Space Marine actually had, actually laying them out right there in front of you. Instead of just being kind of like, they're just super soldiers, the article actually said specifically, they've got this kind of musculature and this kind of skeleton, and they can do this and that, and these kind of senses they have, and these are their adaptations to heat and cold, everything, every single thing about them. So I took all this information, I then translated it into 3rd edition mutations and skills and things like that, and handed my friend Greg this character. And it was a big character sheet. It had a lot of information on it. And I don't think Greg ever used more than half of it at any one time. I'm sure if I were to ask him right now, he could probably maybe remember 10% of the character's abilities, and that's fine. Occasionally I would have to remind him things, and occasionally fellow players who were more crunchy-oriented than he was would remind him, oh yeah, by the way, Greg, your character can do that. But Greg was beautiful at playing a super soldier that was a complete innocent. Now, how he got onto the planet he was on was a mistake. Now, if you remember, I mentioned in the past, the Overkill setting had it was a double planet system. There was Tau, and then there was Seraph. And Seraph had been a nature preserve for dinosaurs, and also a place where the owner of this system had hid a military base. Niven 7 was supposed to have been delivered to Seraph. But because the military is the military even in the future, he got delivered to the wrong planet. He was in a cryo tube, he was frozen, he was asleep, and he got put in storage because there was no paperwork for him here. And then the world ended. The characters found him in a collapsing base, and the base was collapsing due completely to their efforts. They open the capsule up. He wakes up to see this motley crew of mutant things looking at him. One of them looks him at the face and says, "Follow us." And being a good trooper, he did. And at first, everyone thought he was a super soldier, flat out just a trooper. Over the course of the campaign, they came to realize that he was more than that. He began to encounter code words. There were 3 of them. I believe that Nineveh and Gehenna were 2 of them. And after the 3rd one finally clicked, it unlocked the information that he had inside his head. And that was, he wasn't a trooper. He was the commander. And his troops were on Seraph. He knew where they were. He knew how to activate them. So now, suddenly, the group had access to 4,000 Space Marines. Which, come on, you'll know it's going to happen, was very timely because the group needed a military force to help them overthrow the empire of humanity. So the group went to Seraph, adventures ensued, and they came back with the troopers. I will eventually explain the adventures that Niven has had. But what was great about my friend Greg playing this, he trusted me to hand him that character. And then he took what I gave him, and he ran with it. He played that character to the hilt as an innocent, as a completely naive individual living in the body of a super soldier of someone that could break brick wall with his bare hands, who could leap over into second-story windows, who could fight for hours at a time before the fatigue poisons would build up in his system, who could survive anywhere on anything, including at one time his own flesh. He played that so well, and some of the most memorable episodes, my best memories from that campaign, was because of my friend Greg. I'm going to have to send him a link to this. I don't think he's had his ego stroked this much in years. But that was an example of someone trusting me, and then someone taking what I had given them and doing the best they could with it. Now, unfortunately, because I had changed the way I developed the characters over the course of the campaign, those that came in the middle of the campaign, and some of the players were there until the end, the ones that came in the middle, their characters weren't as well balanced, and they weren't quite as powerful as the ones that had been done on the later date. And one of my friends, we actually made some significant changes to her character because she was just displeased with the character. So I expanded her abilities. I gave her some new abilities. We tapped into the whole idea from TMNT after the bomb about the Australian Aborigines using almost like using a crystal-like magic, like tapping into psionic powers that she focused through crystals. And so we were able to salvage that character. Another character I took, he was a mutant bear. I made him tougher. I gave him a mutation of he had been a normal bear, but he got a chitinous hide. He got armor plating all over his body, and it was metal based. So he actually had to eat metal on a regular basis in his diet to keep himself healthy, because it was leaching it out of his blood and his bones. He needed to consume it, otherwise he'd get anemic. So I was able to salvage some of the characters and move them forward. Now, one of the reasons I did this redesign thing is some of the earlier characters, while it was very typical Gamma World, they were wacky, really to my mind were strange to the point of just being a little annoying. For example, we had someone that had played a mutant dog that had a full turtle carapace and 4 tentacles for arms and was bright yellow. It didn't help in the fact that the person playing him, someone that went by the name of Dwayne, was the creepiest human being I have ever met in my entire life. He shook my hand once. My skin crawled for 3 days, and I'm not exaggerating. Every time I thought about it, I'd be like, ugh. It's what I imagine it must be like if you were to touch one of a Lovecraftian deep one. Dwayne was a weird guy. No one knows how he got in my game. No one was sad when he stopped coming. But I preferred designing the characters, at least partially to begin with, and then full-fledged later on, because I think that people ended up with better characters, closer to what they wanted, and I think everybody had more fun. And I'll be honest, in many ways, the game really did transform over time from a strict post-apocalyptic Gamma World campaign into a Gamma World-based superhero campaign. And that wasn't bad. Things got really high-powered at the end. Niven 7 was a combat monster, but he fit in with the rest of the group by the time the campaign came to a close. Or at least when it finished. I could have kept going with that campaign. I loved it so much. And it became so important to me. But people's lives move on, so we hit a nice climax and the game broke up. And if anyone would like the notes that I have for those, at least the ones I have in digital form, I have put together a PDF that has all of the different notes that I came up with, some of the listings, the things that I will be covering in future videos, and the complete stats of my friend Greg's character, Niven 7. So I hope you found this discussion about character development in that campaign interesting.